Now, Nelson Mandela Bay is trying to use its motor city image to attract major investment. The city produces nearly 50% of SA vehicles, hosting automakers like VW and Isuzu, with Stellantis, which is set to be next. The automotive manufacturer has announced a 3 billion rand investment in a new plant in Nelson Mandela Bay. But how best can the city secure investment in not just its motoring industry, but in other sectors? David Furlonger, editor-at-large for Financial Mail, joins us now with more insight. Thank you so much for your time, David. What's the weighting of the automotive industry in Gqeberha?
The weighting? Well, if we look at some of the companies you mentioned, they've got Isuzu there, they've got VW there. And remember, Nelson Mandela Bay is a broader area than just Gqeberha.
Yes.
So it includes quite a big area there. You've got the Ford engine plant, you've got Stellantis in there, you've got tyre manufacturers, you've got truck manufacturers, you've got lots and lots of component manufacturers. Because remember that South African vehicle manufacturing began in Nelson Mandela Bay, in what was then Port Elizabeth, in 1924. So it's 100 years old. Their problem is that the local economy is too dependent on the industry. And if you look along the coast now, what's happening in East London or Buffalo City, where Mercedes-Benz South Africa is likely to shed over 20% of its workforce, it has an enormous impact on that city. So Nelson Mandela Bay, even before this, has been looking desperately for ways for many years to reduce its dependence on the motor industry.
And that is a matter of prudence. It is a matter of making sure that, of course, you are depending on a wide range of industries, David. It isn't because we are foreseeing that at some point we may hit a bit of a wall and we're unable to grow the economy there based on the sector.
No, I mean, there is no panic at the moment. There is no reason to think that things are going to go wrong. But if you look at the fact that the local vehicle sales are falling, exports have come down very sharply this year, and a lot of our companies are very export dependent. For example, VW is very export dependent. So if you look at those and you foresee a sort of disaster, you really want to avoid that disaster. I mean, you referred to the city as Motor City.
Yeah.
Now, it's always thought of itself as a bit of a Detroit, the US city. Now, Detroit was thriving. Then when Ford and General Motors and at that time Chrysler fell into trouble, the Detroit economy completely collapsed. I mean, the city was a disaster. I was over there on business once and I was offered a 4-bedroom luxury home for $10,000.
Wow.
And that was when the rand was worth rather more.
more.
And it, but the city collapsed. Now, there's no reason to believe that that's going to happen in Nelson Mandela Bay, but you have to be prudent and you need to diversify.
Yeah, talking about that, then what are the low-hanging fruits for them to kind of do that? And I also wonder if this is maybe not a thing of looking past the short-term headwinds as well?
Surprisingly, Nelson Mandela Bay and its environs, they've got the largest citrus growing area, or the most successful citrus growing industry in South Africa. It's the mohair capital of the world. It's underdone its tourism. I mean, there is so much for tourists to see in the Eastern Cape, but nothing has ever really happened. Then you're looking at green energy. I mean, wherever you go in the Eastern Cape these days, there are wind farms. And they have just won a 105 billion rand investment from a green energy company called Hive Energy. It's based in London, but it's run by South Africans. So the prospect of exporting billions of rands a year of green hydrogen and other forms of clean energy. So, those are the sort of things they can be looking at.
Well, can doesn't mean they are. So I want to speak about that. In the plan vision, of course, it does also, I think, at some point, David, rely on stability of local government and the ability to then put together a vision and see it through. So I'm keen to get your thoughts on that, considering how maybe also local government has worked with the auto sector. Could we see that same kind of vision and focus then being diversified to other sectors?
You're right about local government. I mean, the provincial government has been a disaster in many respects down the years. Then you've got the Nelson Mandela Bay Municipal Council, which goes to and fro, or has gone to and fro over the years between various coalitions. The current mayor is a member of a tiny party which is in coalition with the EFF and ANC. At a meeting a couple of weeks ago, it was jokingly, I think it was jokingly suggested that he should get a long service medal because he'd been mayor for 13 months, just over a year. But it's not just those, it's then you've got Transnet. Because Nelson Mandela Bay does have the advantage of the Gqeberha port, and the Gqeberha Special Economic Zone is doing incredibly well. It's a remarkable success story. And they've also got the Port Elizabeth port, which has been there for a long time, or the Gqeberha port. But Transnet has not kept PE's port up to date, and the rail services are a disaster. There should be a north-south rail corridor which would allow Ford to move its cars to the port from Tshwane, move its engines back up the other direction to put in its vehicles. But Transnet just has not kept any of its promises or any of its deadlines. Remember that Ford put in 16 billion rand a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Part of the deal from government was that it would have that rail link ready when it started a couple of years ago. And it hasn't. So there are serious government-related obstacles to overcome.
Does this failure by Transnet then to provide that rail link between Gqeberha and Pretoria then make the cost of doing business for the automotive companies there in PE greater?
Oh yes, it does. Yeah. And we're not just talking about the Eastern Cape companies.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, let's start off with those. Ford wants to send its engines to the plant from Gqeberha, and it wants to export its vehicles out of the Gqeberha harbour. That's all it wants to do, because no one wants to be near Durban anymore. Also, Isuzu wants to use the rail link to get to its major customers up in Gauteng. VW wants to do the same. There's talk of BMW wanting to export through Gqeberha, because they're also sick and tired of Durban. So if they can get the rail link, then it just makes everyone's life easier, more cost effective. I mean, Isuzu were telling me that 85% of the vehicles they send around the country go on road trucks. Only 15%.
That's expensive.
Yeah, only 15% go by rail. If Transnet can get its act together, amongst many challenges that Gqeberha has and Nelson Mandela Bay has, it will make life a hell of a lot easier.
Well, David, it looks like our new government is what we need and it's what we've got. So we'll see how that all emerges. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
That was Editor-at-Large for the Financial Mail, David Furlonger.